Okay, quick non-meandering version. This is Bull Moose. Wow, this is jerky. I'm using my new camera here because I had some issues with my old one. There's a longer, more rambling, more curse-filled intro that I'm going to be making available again. But I'm going to try to do this one quicker and a little bit more polished. One reason for the other one and why I'm going to keep it up there is that it shows some of the difficulties I had with the rules. But I also had a lot of difficulties with my camera in it. So if you left with any questions, though, I may be a little bit more detailed, and I may actually miss some things here, so we'll see. All right. So this is a game. Let me get a couple of disclosures out of the way. Whatever. This is a review copy. Patrick Stevens and has given me a number of review copies. This is just a playtest copy, though, so these aren't your final components. I don't know whether it's in print or not. I don't know if I know it's going to the printers, but I don't know at what level it's at within that, like whether the rules are going through a final review and you wanted to get this to me before that. I know that I basically begged for a chance to do this one, though, which I almost never do. Okay. So the game is about the 1912 election, which is also particularly interesting to me. Long ago, I asked when I played 1960 campaign for the White House, I really thought there were two other specific elections that should be done. One was another game by Numbskull, a different designer though, Divided Republic, which I enjoyed, and you should see the video for that. And the other was the that's the 1960 election, and this is the 1912 election, which I also thought was interesting. 1912 has 5 different candidates in it for the game. There were really only 3 that had a serious chance. So one of the criteria that I'm going to use to judge the game is at what level does it seem unlikely? What extra hurdles are in the way of the really minor characters? And in fact, the Bull Moose should be a little weaker than the Democrats or Republicans. But that's not to say it was completely impossible that kind of chaotic situation could have self-destructed. So there may be a built-in imbalance to the deck. For the game itself, and it may be one that stronger players will bring out and start creating less of, like, you know, if everybody at the table is fairly strong, it may be less of a shoe-in. It may be the initial victory, the initial time you play, it's almost guaranteed it'll go to the Democrats, simply because I've noticed, because I started playing already, the progressives have, you know, a lot of anti-Republican cards, and the Republicans have a lot of anti-progressive cards, and these guys have anti-everybody cards. Democrats are just kind. But there's certainly room for people to play it in there's a lot of take that in it, but it tends to cost you something in terms of your own chances of victory. So it seems unlikely that people are going to play that. I don't know. Okay, so let's go over the components, the map, stuff like that. First of all, the map is divided up into different states. There are all the different boxes. California's got 2 boxes because the electorate was kind of split by the Republican Party being there, being split into progressives, etc. And some state, and they're both kind of considered their own states, although you visit them both in the same location. You have square boxes, which indicate that somebody has a party affiliation to that state, or a bonus in the party. Wow, that's really jerky. And then you have circular ones, which are swing states, which have a number of special rules regarding them towards the end of game scoring. And also nobody's going to get a bonus in them. And the ones that have these have that's an end game bonus as well, basically. Other symbols that are in there other than the party symbol, some of them have these little choo-choos. Those are rail hubs. And let's see, that's about it. The cards, Each player has their own deck of 28 cards. I'll explain how those work a little later, but the actual cards have a number, which is kind of like the CDG Ops number here. That's going to be the amount you can move and the amount of vote cubes you can cast. They have a name, a picture. A couple of icons might be on there. If it's got a party icon, that's a quick symbol that you can do something to that player. So if you look at the text, must be in the east to remove 2 from the Republican there. If it's got a little choo-choo, you can spend it for an express train route. And then it's got a text that explains really enough that you don't even need this, but that's for a quick view. It also has a letter here which indicates where the text is in effect. In this case, it'll be in the east. And you have, well, we'll get to that, but you have the normal CDG choice between text and number. Okay. So, each of the candidates has their own deck, which differentiates them that way. They also are going to have certain special abilities, which I'll run through pretty quickly because they're on the first page, so they must be the most important thing. It's kind of nice they're on the first page because I was able to access them. They should be on a player aid. Hopefully, each player will have a player aid, or there'll be a couple of them at least, to share that have all these written out on them. Otherwise, you'd want to photocopy that and have it scratched down somewhere for a while. So the Republican special ability is going to be to move a cube anywhere within the region you occupy at the end of your round. And you can't place cubes in California or South Dakota, which are the 2 states that you're not going to be on the ticket in. So that's done at the end of the round, and that's an important distinction. This is your token. If you're the Republicans, you're the red one, because they have the red deck, and they have the red cubes. And yes, there's these huge cubes. Those count as 5 smaller cubes. Again, no clue what the production of the final version is going to be like. Maybe more moderate-sized big cubes. The board, I have a pretty good idea what Numskull's boards look like, but this is actually being produced by someone else. Patrick Stevens designed it, but what Blue Panther is, and he's a good guy. He's mainly done war game. He's got a publishing technique with the war games, which may be a little cheaper than what you're used to from Numskull. I know in the other one I talked about how nice Numskull's boards are. I was kind of mistaken about how this is going to be produced, though, so I don't know if he's going to be using the same kind of, it's got cards, it's got cubes and stuff. He might just be in contact and running the business side, but keeping the standards at Euro quality. Okay, the progressives, they gain an extra cube in each round anywhere in the region they occupy at the end of the round, and they're not allowed to place them in Oklahoma, where they have no allowance on the ticket. The socialists are the last of the end of the round ones. They gain a cube for each state that has a tie or majority that they're involved in at the end of a round. Okay, the other 2 have actions that take place at different times. I think during your turn phase, your actual turns. The Democrats gain a cube in the state they occupy every time they play a card for its numeric value in the South. So every time they play a card in the South, they're going to get some extra cubes there. And that gives them a really, really powerful voting advantage if they go concentrate on the South at all. And the Prohibition Party, that's the last of them, gets to move a cube that belongs to any party from any opponent from the state you occupy to another state in the same region. And the map divides things up into different regions here. Republican and progressive cubes can't be moved to a state where they're not on the ticket. When an opponent plays a card against you, you get 2 cubes in popularity. Normally people get 1. Well, the dry party, the Prohibition Party, is probably the least likely to be able to actually win the presidential candidacy. Okay. We talked about the board. In the center of each place is the number of electoral votes that state has at this point. For the setup of the game, each player starts in the location that I've got them indicated in, and then they're going to take 8 cards from the top of the deck. And they pick 4 of those that they think they'd like to use for that particular turn. And then the other 4 are going to go on top of the deck. Now, you have to be careful in your picking because you have to combine, you know, what the points are and what the text is to come up with a sequence of 4 actions or that possibly lead into the next set of cards that you really want to take. And that can be complicated because sometimes if you have a card like this, it gives you this express rail movement. That's a move card that's not going to generate you any votes if you do that. Alternatively, you know, you might have a card where you want to use the text, but you have to get there first. So you either have to play one of these, if it's a rail hub to rail hub movement, or you have to play a movement card, a number card that'll get you to where you want to go. And you probably want to be stashing some votes each turn, so you probably don't want to be whipping around the country too fast without using these guys, just because that would be a waste. I'll have to reshuffle all these decks because I started playing before, and that's another thing that'll be available, is there will be a blooper reel of my first turn when I used my poor other camera, which I may switch back to, just because it's a better camera than this. This thing is really jerky. It was cheap. And yeah, I'm seriously considering putting a donate button up because I can't afford to buy a new camera and a new decent one every year. I thought this would be decent. We'll see if it's as jerky as it looks, but right now it looks really questionable. Okay. So, on your turn, what the game is going to be comprised of is 7 hands or rounds of those 4 cards each then, after you do that initial setup. Each person gets there's 28 cards in total. Each person gets their first 8 cards. They put 4 of them back on top of the deck, which means next time they're going to get those 4 and 4 more for their next turn choice. So they can always kind of put cards off, but eventually, you know, they've got to use them all, and they have some knowledge of what's coming up in the future, so they can kind of plan for that in the first part of the turn, or in the preceding turn. After you go through the 4 cards, you've completed a round, and at that point, some of these things marked with the red R on here are going to take place, and they happen in turn order. Turn order is always Republican. Oh God. Yeah, I screwed this up too. Going clockwise around back to Prohibition. I tried to remind myself not to, but I was tired last night, and I always go counterclockwise. Okay. So then, as you play each card, you have a number of choices with it. For one thing, you can use it for the points. Using it for the points, those points will allow you to, each point allows you to move to an adjacent state in general, or to buy some cubes in the state that you end your turn in, or, well, and if you spend for points, you can use cubes for these special endorsements here. So if I had a 4-point card, I'm Wilson, and I want to move with this, I want to use it, I have a number of choices. I'm going to have 4 cubes to spend on my turn. I could just dump all 4 cubes into the space I'm in and not move. I cannot move and drop cubes as I go. I could also drop a cube in the space I'm in and 3 cubes in the newspaper because there's a newspaper bonus there. Wow, that gets blurry too. Or I could choose to move some spaces. So I could move, say, 1 into New York, which is adjacent. I'll explain adjacency. Adjacency in general is off the board. The four corners aren't adjacent. The east are all adjacent to each other and to Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Okay, so I could move to New York and look for those cubes. Here they are. And I could drop all four of them in New York, or some shift where some of them go into the newspaper thing. Or I could play it for what it says. Unfortunately, what it says is I must be in New York to gain 5 there, which would give me 1 more point than I would have normally. So if I had started in New York instead of New Jersey, I could drop 5 in New York. And since New York's worth a lot of electoral votes, that seems somewhat appealing. I wasn't able to figure out, I didn't play far enough to figure out whether the strategy is better to go for, small states or really throw more votes into the big states. From most electoral games, the fuck the small state strategy seems to be the wise one. But with 5 players, well, if everybody's going for the big states, you're better off going for the small ones. Okay. So you're going to get 4 turns in a row. Well, each player gets 4 turns sequentially in order, whatever, playing their cards and doing those things. Then you come to the end of the round and you do that little task of the special bonuses at the end of the round. And then you draw 8 more cards, you pick 4 and put 4 back on top, and you keep doing this until you're out of cards completely. Until you've played those last 4 cards, you're done with 28 cards. And at that point, I forgot to explain something. When you move into a state with normal movement, and there's other candidates there, it's going to cost you an extra movement cube for each candidate if you want to stay there. But you can just pass through for the normal one. Okay. Make sure the... Okay. So, after all those cards have been played, it's time to start doing the election. And people have cubes all over the board. The first thing we do is we define what are the empty states at this point. Empty states are going to be states where nobody has any cubes. That sounds pretty clear? Okay, yeah, except they stay empty states through this process, which means each step of the process can affect them even if they gain cubes as they go. The first thing that happens is empty states that have a party icon, well, they all have a party icon in them, they get 1 cube for each of the party icons they have. So, for example, Arkansas would get a Democratic cube, Kansas here would get a Progressive and a Republican cube in it. Any empty swing states get 1 cube of each player in there. Then we're going to worry about the notion of... of the absolute plurality. The absolute plurality works as follows. If someone has twice as many cubes as you do somewhere, you're knocked out of there completely. So if one person has twice as many cubes, and this is during the actual scoring of that space. It's not done partway through the thing. You don't lock states or anything like that in this. If you have, if you happen to be at least twice as many as every other player in a particular thing that's up for election or appropriation, in general, you will be the only person competing there. Everybody else gets swept out. Now that's important because these 2 endorsement boxes, and that'll work that way kind of for the elections too, but these 2 endorsement boxes at the end of the game, they both get resolved after you fill the empty states. And what happens is, if anybody who has half or less of the cubes in a space that the leader in that space has gets removed from it. Okay. If there's only one person left, he keeps all his cubes and he's going to get to allocate them. Otherwise, all the cubes go into a cup or something, and one of them is drawn. All of that person's cubes remain in the box. Everyone else's are swept aside. So, if you're in a tight race for the newspaper or the Senate, maybe risking a lot and being able to win it all or lose it, to win all the cubes that you have in there for use, but you could lose them all completely. And these are going to get allocated as follows after they get resolved. The winner of the newspaper endorsement box gets to put his cubes in any states that were judged empty in the earlier step. The winner of the senatorial support box gets to put all the cubes that he had in here into swing states at his choice. If there were no empty states at the beginning of the process, the newspaper all gets thrown into the player's home state. And it may be unlikely that there are empty. It may be there are no empty states with 5 players moving around if they're spreading the votes around and such not. Okay. Then there's popularity, which is done a little differently. So everybody has a card that'll give him a cube in here for popularity in their deck. In addition, if people play a card against you at any time, you get, if you lose any cubes due to that, the people who were played against get a cube in their popularity box. And if you remember, the special ability of the prohibition included when an opponent plays a card against you, you get 2 cubes in your popularity. So you really don't want to hack on the, the dries. And hopefully they don't really need it. Okay. And popularity will not be drawn. Whoever has the most cubes in the popularity gets to put however many he's over the next highest person on the board anywhere. If multiple people are tied for the most, they all get that advantage. Unless it's everyone, in which case they all just, in which case they're counted as each getting 1 cube in that case. And that's done, I guess, in player order. Okay. Then you resolve the actual states. And you can do these in any order, but it's more fun to save the biggest ones for last because they're going to have the biggest effect, perhaps, and are the hardest to count. So what you do there is the same as you did for these in terms of determining who's eligible due to the absolute plurality. If only one person has at least twice as many as everyone else, or as any other single person, all the other people are cleared out, he wins the state. No matter what, anybody who's less than, well, who's half or less, gets pulled out of the state completely. And the remaining players, again, get put in that cup, believe it or not, shaken up, and one is drawn, and that person's cube goes in the state, and they now own it. I'm going to have to do some kind of, indication, hey, this state hasn't been allocated yet, now it's been allocated, or whatever. Just to indicate what's going on. Same thing with the empty states. We'll probably put cubes during the empty state process off to the side to make it still look empty. Okay. And then you count up the votes. And if one person has more votes than anyone else, there's a total of 531 electoral votes, they get to become president. If there's a tie, then it goes to whoever has the most states. This is always kind of a fudge factor in these games. It's trying to represent throwing it into the House of Representatives. It doesn't really. In a sense, the electoral map mirrors the House of Representatives. If anything, the most states actually probably means you're at a disadvantage. So here's the example. Let's look for one. Nevada here has 3 electoral votes. That is representative of their 1 House of Representatives member and their 2 senators at the time, right? Well, if you throw it into the House, Nevada now only would have 1 vote. And New York, on the other hand, has 46 5 votes. 2 of those votes are their senators. So again, in the House, they'd have 43 votes. So if it goes to the House, actually the larger states have even more power than they would in the normal electoral college. So it's kind of the reverse of what it should be. In addition, there are, I don't know, there are other factors in here where the actual electoral, the electoral college is all or nothing for most states. There's a few states that'll split their vote, but I don't know in this period. It may have been actually all or nothing. And then the congressional delegations probably are not all or nothing. So if you look at a state like New York, it had a Republican faction to it. Wow, it's actually Republican based. Well, that makes sense. Roosevelt was Republican. But in other periods, let me try to think of one that was really, well, the swing states, you know, they probably are returning about half Republicans, half Democrats. So they would be very unlikely to actually vote in the same kind of block that you would see in the Electoral College. Anyway, that's the game. I hope I didn't miss too much. I'm coming back with the playthrough. I'll probably use my other camera just because this one really looks shitty to me so far. For as long as I can, although the components to this game are not that important, simply because this isn't what you're going to see production-wise. These cards are worn out from play tests. The board has a little from being folded. I don't know if the cubes are going to be the same as they are here. And there is also a blooper reel of me cursing and being very upset at my old camera. But I also was misplaying. I was playing in the wrong order and all kind of stuff. Forgot the Prohibition Party entirely. And I only got through one round. So, let us send this up.